In today's video, we're going to be looking at Chapter 6 of the text concerning the selection and development of police officers. Most agencies around the country use some form, typically set at the state level, of POST, which stands for Police Officer Standard and Training. In Georgia, it's actually Peace Officer Standing and Training because there is a difference between peace officers and police officers. Police officers are a more specialized version of peace officers. Peace officers can also include probation officers, correctional officers, things like that. They're criminal justice roles, but not necessarily police officers. They use early contact with the cadets, with potential recruits, to both screen in and screen out officers. So individuals that have a good background, intelligence, capability doing the job, they want to screen those in. Individuals that have criminal records, poor financial backgrounds, potentially conflicting mental health issues, those are individuals that want to be screened out. So recruitment is a very important aspect of police work because you're going to have some losses. You're going to have, depending on the size of the department, 1 to 20 officers leaving every month. Again, just depending on the size of the department and other issues that are going on in a particular area. So you have to think about what types of methods you want to engage in recruitment. Do you want to do billboards, ads on TV or through social media, hiring fairs? Are you going to target the general public with those hiring fairs? Are you going to try and focus on targeted hiring fairs, like at colleges and universities, partnering with the programs within those universities that teach individuals things like criminal justice, social work, other sort of like fields? Are you going to target individuals coming out of the military? Are you going to look for individuals coming out of the military with military police training? There's a lot of different ways to target individuals, but also looking at who you're targeting. Are you trying to get people that have policing experience? Are you trying to get new recruits? Trying to get people that have college degrees? It really just depends, and whether you're having if you're doing a TV ad, for instance, maybe you want to reach into that toolkit and pull out a local personality, either someone affiliated with the criminal justice system or just even a potential local celebrity. In Atlanta, for instance, Shaquille O'Neal owns a Krispy Kreme. That seems like that'd be a pretty good person to make a police recruiting ad with. At least, he gets a pop from the donut shop. You have the donut joke tie-in with police officers, and you have someone that people look up to as a celebrity. So you have to just sort of figure out what your goals are and then address those in the best possible manner. It's also very important to try to find individuals that are sort of service-oriented, people that are doing this not just because they need a paycheck, someone that wants to help the community that they live in. When you're looking at selection, there are several things that can be disqualifiers for police work. In the past, police departments had done things like put in height requirements. For instance, having a 5'7" height requirement in the 1970s was found to exclude over 90% of female candidates. So they've removed those. I had a class ask me if Atlanta police currently had any kind of height requirements for male or female officers. I reached out to them on Twitter, and they got back to me and said that they don't. What they can have, though, in modern days are what is known as bona fide occupational qualifications. Things that if you can't do this, you can't do the job. So if you can't drive a car, you probably can't be a police officer. Things like that. They also look at the past of the individual, criminal record, financial records, the age of the individual, because it costs a lot of money to train an officer. So you want to have someone that's going to be employed in that department for a long time. While you can't have height restrictions of someone that's too short or potentially too tall in the absence of a sort of a pre-existing medical condition, there are, some requirements for being able to physically perform the job. Most of those are related to some other type of physical activity. So they don't necessarily have a weight requirement, but they make it so you have to run a mile in a certain period of time, which is going to exclude some individuals that couldn't perform those abilities. They also have vision requirements. Some even have educational or residency requirements, requiring that officers live in the jurisdiction where they're in. If they have those, they oftentimes have partnerships with um, local housing, apartment complexes, also with banks to provide low interest loans to police officers. Um, Educational requirements are becoming more strict. Um, More and more push for officers to have some sort of college education, although many places don't have it required. But it is one of those things also that kind of goes hand in hand. The college experience versus recreational drug use has been sort of a sticking point that departments have had problems finding individuals that are qualified through college education that come out without having had any kind of experimental drug use, especially with the mixed nature of things like marijuana legality in this country right now. Some of the general suitability things that they look at in the background investigation, criminal background history, financial background history, drug use. The main thing with the financial background is they don't want to hire people that are $2, $3, $4, $500,000 in debt, because that's an individual that's going to be likely to commit financially based police corruption. If they walk into a drug dealer's house and they find hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, it's going to be more tempting to someone that's in dire financial straits than someone that is in good financial straits. You're also going to have to do a polygraph test, and there's no way to fake those. Whether you put a tack in your shoe or you take a Xanax, you're not the test in and of itself. It does measure those fluctuations around lies. The main thing it's checking for is, are you being deceptive? If you take a Xanax, you're not going to have any reaction to any question. If you put a tack in your shoe, you're going to have an overreaction to a lot of questions. So you're not even really going against the machine. You're going against the person giving the test, who is trained in things like deception detection. So there's not really any way to beat a polygraph test. You also go through a psychological evaluation to make sure that you are a good temperament and are within the psychological profile that is needed in that particular industry. A county sheriff's department and the Department of Homeland Security are going to have different psychological profiles that they're looking for. So it really just depends on what the wants and the needs of that department are at the time. There's also going to be a medical check. Again, they want people that are going to be able to be a police officer for a long time. So if something chronic, persistent, or potentially terminal is going to come up during that medical check, they want it to happen before they invest the resources into an individual to train them to be a police officer, and then they, not to sound cold, but then they die in a year. They're also going to go through various written exams. Those are going to be based in general knowledge, also general knowledge of the governmental operations, and then also various personal interviews with various managers in the police force, hiring managers, operational managers, depending on what the individual is sort of being prepped for. Are they a college-educated officer that's being groomed to be in the management hierarchy? Are they basically a line level officer that's just, it's there because that's almost like a thrill seeking thing. They want to be there and they want to, jump over fences and shoot cats out of trees, things like that. So depending on what positions they're trying to fill in the department at the time, that's going to be the nature of some of these pre-screening procedures. As far as the development goes, basically the post program, which is regulated by the state in Georgia. So all officers going through training go to the post certification, with the exception of the Atlanta Police Department. They have their own training facility. They do get post certified, but they basically go above and beyond that in the way that they train their officers and they educate their officers and prepare them to be a police officer in the city of Atlanta, which is why a lot of those officers get poached by other departments. They work in Atlanta for a year, and then the chief of police from Gwinnett or from Roswell or Cobb County says, how do you like being peed at and spit on in Atlanta? Like, you want to come work in our, less urban environment, and excuse me, you want to work in our, more Mayberry environment, where you don't have to do some of the things you might have to do in Atlanta. You might, and we're going to pay you more, and you're going to have less overtime requirements, and again, not having the level of violence and things like that. So a lot of officers get poached out of the city and go into surrounding jurisdictions. Within the training, the whole training procedure within a department, what you get is going to be based on what you're putting into it. What type of policies you're having, what type of programs you're putting forward as important. Those things are going to resonate with the employees and the recruits as they go through the process. So some of the things that are seen as most important in a lot of jurisdictions are things like report writing, being able to have good communication skills, learning the aspects of patrol, learning the principles of investigation, what types of things to do in a situation versus how to handle a crime scene versus how not to screw one up. Administering first aid, self-defense, firearm training, criminal law, ethics training. You can see the chart in the text. There are a lot of things that they go over, and unfortunately, some of those things don't really have as much time as they need. So they do education continuing throughout the course of the career, and some of those things that they've looked at in terms of more recent topics that are becoming more and more important are making ethical decisions, not only learning how to use force, but learning how to de-escalate the use of force, using less force in a situation, getting the individuals that are potentially altered or agitated to use to calm down, through increased communication skills, also learning to detect instances of mental health crises. Again, with that communication, de-escalation of force, things go hand in hand. And also looking at addressing issues of racial and ethnic sensitivity. Not only aspects of cultures so that the police don't inadvertently offend someone, but also appreciating what the police mean to those individual cultures. We all have different personal encounters and aspects with the police, and we talked about some of those on the message board 2 weeks ago. So we all bring different things to the table, and the police meet a lot of different people, and a lot of different people have had a lot of different encounters with the police in the past. Some of those good, some of those bad. So the police have to understand that the average citizen, this isn't going to be their first encounter with the police. So they have to take into account those past experiences when figuring out how they're going to handle a situation, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to de-escalate the situation, and make sure that everyone comes out with at least a fair assessment of what happened. The last thing, right? No, the next to last slide is looking at field training officers. This is a very, very important aspect of policing. Again, this is where you see if King Kong has shit on you or not. It's a line from the Training Day film. Field training officers can be officers that are reviewing new recruits or reviewing people that are being promoted to new units. And it's a very impactful role because you're basically indoctrinating a new recruit or a new officer in your unit into the social norms of that group. You're teaching them what things you can and can't do, sort of the way of the street. This is where the streets and the book come together and merge into operational policing. You're not going to have just that street cops code that was in the previous chapters. It's a crock of shit. Okay? But you can't just take the manual every time and go exactly by the book in policing. You have to implement your discretion and know when to use discretion. So field training officers can be sources of good or bad behaviors forming and proliferating through a police department. So some other aspects about career growth. We talked about continued in-service training. The officers that do better at that are not seeing that as something that's a hassle for them, are officers that are going to move forward in the department. The ones that are aligning themselves with what the department's goals are going to be better suited for being managers in the future. And these training processes and how making them in and of themselves test for the officers can be very beneficial in um, trying to figure out who you want to promote in the department. Also, specialized training. Oftentimes, the more specialized an officer is, it limits their advancement through the ranks of the department. But sometimes that's what they want to do. The detectives, you're going to max out probably like at captain, maybe you typically below that. You're not going to be a major or a chief. You're going to be a detective, and you're going to be in that subset of the bureaucracy. Um, Same thing with like SWAT, or even Vice, looking at special operations for drug crimes. You might move up within that small subset of the bureaucracy, but you've removed yourself from the larger tiers. Um, to that point, you have to find officers that are continuing their education, continuing their training, working well within the department as opposed to against it, to see who you're going to promote within the department. A part of that is lateral entry. Are you promoting individuals that are within the department, or are you hiring people from outside the department for those manager roles? Chief is something that's oftentimes hired from outside the department in major institutions, because the change of a police chief is looked at as a want from the larger government to have a regime change. They want to have things done differently than the old police chief was doing, and if we just promote the deputy chief, then that's basically the same person coming in. So lateral entry is something that is a part of police operations, but something that sort of has to be managed, because if the lower level officers see that the only people that are being given these new captain positions, major positions, are people from outside the department, there's no point in me staying in this department if I want to be a major or a captain somewhere. So it's kind of a balance that you have to walk between promoting officers from within that are doing good work, and being able to bring in sort of new blood officers from outside the department to change or shake things up. Okay, so we'll continue looking at aspects of police operations throughout the continuing slides.